Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm joined here today with my friend Luca Pandolfi, who joins us by way of Rome, Italy, and the Finger Lakes in New York. You've got a pretty interesting journey coming here, young man. I appreciate it. It's great to talk. Good to talk to you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jamie. Thanks for having me on today. Really excited about it, honestly. It was a great drive down, as you said. We got to see a lot of Pennsylvania's finest on the way, including the Allegheny Forest, which was gorgeous.
It's absolutely beautiful. And that's very important to our conversation as we move further down the road here. But tell me a little bit about Luca. You were born and raised in Rome, Italy, which had to be like Rome is like, the most historic, romantic city, maybe. When you think of that, you think of Rome and Paris.
Yeah, I mean, also romanticized city in many ways. I mean, it has its downsides, but no, actually, I was born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Funnily enough,
really?
Yes, I was. Yes, no, little small town in Massachusetts, and my mom works for the United Nations.
Okay.
So pretty much 6 months after being born, I was on a plane, and we were on our way down to Zimbabwe, actually in Africa, and that was the first place that I lived. 5 years in Zimbabwe. My mom was stationed there. She was the country director. And then we moved from Zimbabwe, we moved to Rome for the first time. And there was 3 years in Rome. And so just to give a little more background to that, my mom's New Yorker, grew up in New York City. Actually, she was born in Philadelphia and then moved to New York City. We're all over the place. And you can tell it's not an easy story. So yeah, she moved. So then she worked for the UN and we went to World Food Program, Zimbabwe, then Rome. My dad's Italian, full born and bred Italian. Both my grandparents were Italian as well. And so we went to Rome for the first time because the World Food Program headquarters is in Rome.
Okay.
And so we were there for 3 years only, till I was 8. And then we moved to Tanzania in Africa again. Loved it. Gorgeous country. 4 years in Tanzania. Fell in love with enough time for me to fall in love and then be completely heartbroken when we moved back to Rome.
Back to Rome. Yeah.
Who would have been heartbroken to move to Rome, right? But no, I was. Like, I loved Tanzania. It was a gorgeous country. And it took a while for me to get back into the swing of Rome once I moved there. So it was 6 years then in Rome. And that's where I do consider myself Roman. If people ask me, it's the quickest answer to say I'm from Rome, because out of 18 years growing up, 9 of them were in Rome.
Sure.
So it's about half of my childhood was there. Speak Italian. At this point, I don't know how fluently because I'm losing practice. It's getting embarrassingly bad at this point. But, after that, then after graduating high school is when I moved to the States, finally. I went to Ithaca College.
Sure.
And that's sort of what brought me here to the States. I knew I always wanted to come to the States for college, honestly. I mean, my mom being a New Yorker and I have an American passport, obviously I'm an American citizen.
Sure.
It was always, just a part of my day I didn't really understand very well because I hadn't lived here. Yeah, we came to New York City to visit my grandma, but that's all I had seen of the States was New York City. And obviously it's a very big country out there, as I've discovered since then. Yeah. We've been all across the country. We've gone down to Florida, out west, and it just never ends, honestly. There's so much to do and see here in the States, and I've been loving it, honestly. It's been a great time here in the States.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And you and I met virtually. This is the first time we've actually met in person. We were introduced, and we have to drop his name, the Oracle of Wellsboro, Rich Bohr, our mutual friend who's brought us together. He's just a fascinating dude, and he really thinks very highly of you, young man. He has a lot of respect for you, and Rich is a guy that's been there, done that, and has a lot of experience and a lot of world experience, life experience. And that's high praise coming from a guy like him.
I mean, I just hope I don't let him down. I mean, he's a great guy, as you said, and he's a mentor to me. And he's definitely been guiding me through the whole process and familiarizing me with Pennsylvania, as we talked about. I mean, he's very much a Pennsylvania man, and he's been helping me get acquainted. And a lot of the reason why the project that we're going to talk about later is moving down to Pennsylvania is thanks to Rich. But obviously, it's he asked not to take up too much time.
No,
today,
we're done. We got to cut it off. We got to stop because
we're over budget.
There'll be consequences. So, we're talking about something that is very, very technical, very highly technical and complex. But you're not an engineer.
No, that's actually a great point to bring up. So I started the research behind this when I was in college. I took a year of independent study to research, and basically, what inspired this is I was taking environmental science at the time. And we were seeing all these great innovations that were supposedly coming out that were going to be great for the environment and great for sustainability. And what really frustrated me is that I wasn't seeing any of them being commercialized. None of them were hitting the market. I couldn't buy any of them and actually implement them. It was all these great ideas, but nothing was actually getting to market. And so I said, I think that rather than becoming an engineer and actually developing new solutions, what's actually needed right now is more someone who takes the existing solutions and actually commercializes them.
And your background is marketing.
And my background is marketing, exactly. So that's where I started getting into marketing and entrepreneurship at that point after studying environmental science, because I was like, I think really what all these industry needs is someone who's not specializing in designing and engineering, but who's specializing in bringing what's been engineered to market in an exciting way that's really going to take off.
Sure.
And so I did a year of independent study looking specifically at fuel systems. I was interested because I was interested in circular economies. How do we get to a point where we can produce more of the goods that we use in a local region? And one of the key ingredients to a circular economy has been fuel. That's one of the missing ingredients, that we don't understand how to do transportation fuel at a local level yet. And so that's where I started looking at what are the systems for locally producing fuel? How could we take products that are available in a local area that are renewable and sustainable and turn those into a fuel that works with the cars and infrastructure that we already have?
Okay.
Because part of my gripe was that we have all these cars on the road, and to say that we need to switch them all as a solution, that's a lot of cars to switch. There's 1.3 billion cars out there in the world globally. And that's part of my global perspective coming in, is I wasn't just thinking about how can we switch on a very small scale in my local community. Because you can turn a community you can switch to electric cars if you really want to, and you put the investment into it. But when you start talking about doing that on a global scale, replacing 1.3 billion cars, the impact of manufacturing replacements, it's a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage. So if we can figure out a solution that works with what we already have, I mean, the 4 R's of sustainability, right? They're reduce, reuse, recycle, and repair.
Right.
The implication being use what we have for as long as you can, because that's the most environmentally friendly thing you can do.
Sure.
The same applies to cars. The best thing we can do is use them as long as their lifespan it allows us to, and just to switch the fuel source. Switch the fuel source to something sustainable, and now the whole system, it's much more simple in trying to put new charging stations, change all manufacturing. Not that there's not a place for that, but just to say.
Well, I think when we talk about sustainability and renewables, right? I think that covers everything. It's got to be a little bit of everything, right? It's got to include fossil fuels. It's got to include wind and solar and all of those things. If it's going to be, it has to be holistic. If it's going to succeed,
Absolutely.
You can't put all your eggs in one basket. You can't cut anything out, because you're always going to have a need for these certain things. And this is fascinating to me. And we'll talk about the fact that you're looking at this from a marketing perspective is really cool for me, because that's what I do. You're talking about environmental science and engineering and civil engineering and all of these things that go around the sustainability piece. And, climate change, huge problem today. And for those of you out there listening that don't believe it, climate change is real. I'm going to go out there and say it right now. There's something happening. It's very real. But I love the fact that what you said about bringing it to the public, because there's a lot of innovation goes on out there that never gets that far.
Exactly. Never hits the market. It's a real shame. No, and in general, I mean, as far as what you're saying, as far as eggs in the basket, I think that's exactly right. Is we need to take a diversified approach to addressing this issue. We need everything and anything that will and might work, and we need to try it all at once. And that's where I've always been against this narrative of 100% EV, because as you said, that's putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
We need to develop multiple
Look what's happening
solutions.
in California.
Exactly. And New York, honestly, recently too, also banned the sale of internal combustion engines after 2035. And so that's, they're trying to force this narrative, and it's just, I think it's going to be counterproductive.
Right.
We need all the solutions we can get at the same time. We need to develop them all in synchronicity and sort of implement them as quickly as we can, really. And so that's where I think sustainable fuels is a key part of that ingredient, and where I developed the system then, in college, which would be taking our waste products. To start with, we were looking at biomass. So biomass is really any organic matter that regrows. So it's a very broad classification, and a lot of stuff fits under biomass, so it can be a confusing term. So I like to narrow it in then and say, originally we were looking at agricultural byproducts, and eventually as we developed the project further, we narrowed in on woody biomass coming from the forest, as being the kind of biomass that's most widely available, specifically within our region. That's the thing, is the abundance of biomass depends on your region. Whatever's abundant is going to depend on what you do locally. And here in Pennsylvania, we have forests and lots of them.
Lots of it, yeah.
All over the place. And so that's where it made sense for the first project, what's most widely available, what's easiest to handle as well. Because a lot of biomass, I mean, you can think of cow manure's a biomass, you know, vegetable oils and animal fats are biomass. Even municipal solid waste, trash, is called biomass.
Right.
And so those are all harder to handle. You don't want to be running a facility handling trash or handling animal waste necessarily, at least not for your first one, because you're going to run into barriers with your community then.
Right.
No one wants to be next to a garbage pile. It's sad to say.
No, it's very true.
Right. The garbage needs to go somewhere. I appreciate that, but nobody wants it to be in their backyard at the end of the day. And wood's a totally different story. Wood smells great. Who doesn't want a wood yard next to them? I mean, that's one of my favorite smells.
It's fantastic.
It's so good. I love going to visit our eventual suppliers and just see, smelling, taking a nice big whiff. Oh yeah. It's always a pleasure. So that was a big part of it, honestly, is it's easy to handle. It's non-hazardous. Well, there's a hazard of fire with chips, of course, but there's no health hazard as far as like viruses and stuff like that. And there's no smells as well. So that was really where we narrowed in on woody biomass. We started working with some of the local agencies here in Pennsylvania. So that's the Pennsylvania Forest Products Association. Great people. Highly recommend checking them out. We've also got the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group, and which is abbreviated to AHUG, if you're going to look them up. AHUG, much easier, much nicer abbreviation. Yeah. And then we've got the Pennsylvania Hardwood Development Council, which is a program by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. Okay. And they're basically all here to promote Pennsylvania's forest products industry. And they immediately latched onto this project for a very specific reason, which is that we're using what's defined as low-grade woody biomass. And now this is the important point, because
explain that. What does that mean?
The different grades. So the high grade stuff is the saw timbers. That's what you'd send to a sawmill, and that's what we're cutting up into our clean, straight boards that we're going to build our houses out of. We're going to do 2x4s out of. Sure. Basically, the important factor is that it's straight and that it's got a certain diameter so that you can cut these boards out of it. And that's high grade stuff. And especially because you have hardwood forests here in Pennsylvania, there's always going to be a market for your high grade because it's just, there's few places where you can get such good quality high grade, and Pennsylvania is on the top of the list. So tons of high grade stuff. Mid grade stuff is the kind of stuff that you can use for particle board, or that you can chip up and use in pellets as well, and other wood products like that. That's the mid grade stuff, and so that's usually, it's still good quality pulp, but there's usually like a bend. So it's the part of the tree where you actually have the bends and stuff, and that's what they'll cut up, and then they'll basically turn into pulp that can also go to your paper mills and stuff. Okay. And then the low grade stuff is really everything that's left. So that's the really small diameter stems. And that's also like leaves and bark, because the sawmills won't take the bark. They'll debark the trees.
They'll debark it, yes.
And so the bark's all left over. And that's the kind of stuff that you'll turn into mulch, as you were saying earlier. That's really one of the primary products that you can make from that, from that low grade stuff right now. But as I mentioned earlier, there's only so much mulch you need.
That's very true.
And there's a lot of low.
In my mind, there's too much mulch. I'm not a fan of mulch. Yeah.
No, and I think honestly, the sellers would agree with you. Like, there's not enough of a market for this stuff. They can make tons of it. There's tons of low grade material, but there's not enough demand for mulch. Sure. Which is one of the main things we know how to do with it. So the fact that we can use that low grade stuff, we can use barks, we can use leaves, we can use small diameter stems, that was music to the ears of the guys in the forest products industry, because that's the kind of stuff that they're trying to develop markets for. Because right now, a logger will go into the forest, and he's going to make tons of money off of taking the high-grade stuff and taking the mid-grade stuff out. Actually, I shouldn't say tons of money, because a lot of these guys operate on very small margins, too. I should say that, actually. The value of the high-grades and the mid-grades, in many cases, will barely cover the cost of operating for these loggers, and that's actually one of the problems, is that depending on where the price of timber is at, they could be either breaking even or even making a small loss, or they could be making some okay profits. So a lot depends on where the market's at for them. And so this would basically enable them to create a new revenue stream while they're on that piece of property and they're taking all that good stuff for the sawmills. Collect also the low grade stuff and send that to us, and we're going to pay you a good price for that material. And now you have another revenue stream. Now all of a sudden you go from barely breaking even on this plot of land to actually making profit.
Making some money. Yeah.
And now you can grow and you can expand your operation. And so for them, it's been a key part of the equation to becoming profitable, really, is how do you create value out of the low grade stuff that right now they're just chipping up and spreading on the forest ground. And there's a place for that. We still need to chip up some of the material onto the forest ground because that actually helps nutrient cycle some of the stuff. So there's a certain percentage, but it's not as much as we're leaving right now. Right now we're leaving it primarily because we don't know what else to do with it.
Exactly.
And so it's all just being spread out there. And that's where we said, we'll create a constant revenue stream for you. We know exactly how much material we're going to need every single year, year after year. We can make a fixed price. There's no fluctuations basically because for gasoline, there's not much fluctuation in the market. We know there's demand for gasoline, unlike for the timber products where the demand fluctuates based off of construction and what's happening in the construction space. Ours remains unaffected. We'll sell our gasoline no matter what because there's enough demand for it. I mean, part of it is that, for this first facility, we're not targeting a huge percentage of the Pennsylvania market. It's not like we're going to feed all of Pennsylvania on gasoline with one facility.
So let's drop back 1 second. Let's jump back because you jumped from biomass to gasoline.
That's true. You're right.
So what we're talking, where we're going in that direction is Woodland Biomass, right? That's the company that you started.
Yep.
And so the purpose of this, and the reason we talked about the biomass, is that you have a process that can take that biomass, all what we just talked about, and turn it into gasoline. And not just some kind of alternative fuel, but actual gasoline. Now, that is fascinating. If that doesn't have everybody's attention, I don't know what will, because you had told me when we first met that if you have a half a tank of gas, you can mix this in with that half a tank, fill your tank up, and it runs just like a normal vehicle. There's nothing that has to be done to the vehicle to accept this fuel.
That's 100% correct, and that was very important for me from the onset. I wanted a solution that didn't require people to change their vehicles, to do any kind of expensive work. This had to be a drop-in solution, something that worked with what was already there. And so, yes, what's coming out of our facility is 87 octane gasoline. It is chemically identical to what's at the gas pump right now. If you leave the area that's serviced by Woodland Bio, just go to a regular gas station, mix and match. There's no problem there. And so that was one of the key characteristics, is that there had to be no limitations for the customer. We didn't want barriers for the customer. So this works with your existing car. You get it from the same place that you currently get gas. And in the best case scenario, we're trying to undercut the existing market by a few cents. So it should be a little bit cheaper as well on top of it.
That's always good. Always good.
And so now you pull up to the gas pump and there's a pump that's telling you, here's something made from a sustainable material that's locally produced. And that's one of the most important parts, is that it's locally produced. So now that when you fill up your gas tank, that money that you're paying for the gas, rather than that being spread out over industries,
it's staying local.
It's staying right in your local area. And that's where I was saying I was fascinated by circular economies. How do we create a situation where we're producing what we need in a local region? And gasoline is a key part of that equation, because right now it's a huge drain on economies. Is all that money you're spending on transportation fuel, that's going towards a few companies and usually refineries in other places.
Absolutely.
It's not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just that they're not local.
Well, and that's a very true statement, because we have sheets in Pennsylvania, right? That's a chain. Okay, but people look at Sheets as kind of a local business because they're in every small town and everything. But buy local is a big deal here in southwestern Pennsylvania. All over, it should be everywhere. But if you, just like this coffee shop we're sitting in, right? It's not a Starbucks.
That's exactly right.
And I have nothing against Starbucks, but you won't catch me in a Starbucks, right? Because I like you, believe in that circular economy, and I think that's how we do it, right? Because what we do here, this coffee that we buy here, stays in Canonsburg.
That's right, exactly. Supporting local jobs,
Absolutely.
who are then going to go support more local jobs. That's part of the circular idea too, is that it's a growing cycle. As more people gain employment in a local area, they're able to support other businesses, which are then able to employ more people, and you get this kind of a beneficial cycle happening. As soon as you can bring new industries into an area. So that's where, trying to create something that's typically been a drain on the community by taking money and sending it out of the community, now being able to localize that. Sure. And that's where we're taking a very Tioga-centric focus for the first project as much as possible.
So Tioga County is going to be ground zero.
That's exactly right.
That's where this is going to happen.
And we want it to be almost like a self-contained, experiment, in that we want to be able to use local products. We want to be able to distribute it locally. Mm-hmm. Now, the distribution side of things, it might not be that simple, let's just say. I mean, it would be lovely to say, like, we're going to drop this off at the gas station down the road, but the reality is, like, distribution of gasoline doesn't work quite that simply.
Right.
So there might be a few extra steps in there. But the general idea is, as much as possible, we want to keep everything within Tioga County to keep. And then, eventually, once we've proved the model out, I mean, this is just a proof of concept. This is the first of its kind.
Right. It's a pilot, right? It's a pilot project.
That's exactly right. So the hope would be, if this works out and everything goes smoothly, we want one of these. I mean, I presume hopefully every county will want one of these that has forest.
But look at Washington County. We got a ton of trees here. We have more than our fair share of trees. We got a lot of woods. I mean, I grew up here. I grew up in the woods. I mean, spent most of my childhood running around in the woods. So we have an abundance of that. And this should be said, is we talked about Pennsylvania being a very rural state, one of the most rural states in the country, which means we have a lot of forests and farms.
That's exactly right.
So this is an ideal state for you to launch something like this.
It really is. I mean, the forest products, honestly, there's more woody biomass than we could probably ever use in Pennsylvania just alone, if you look at woody biomass. But then you also consider that Pennsylvania's biggest industry is agriculture.
Right.
And
by far.
And the other thing we can work with is agricultural byproducts. So there's room for expansion there too, where you can work into, working with cow manures, working with sewage, other types of biomass. We're working with woody biomass, start with, as I mentioned before, just because it's the simplest and what makes the most sense. But there's so much potential in Pennsylvania between the different types of industries that you have here, to create synergies between those industries. And the other one that honestly we haven't even touched on yet, which is it's honestly a whole nother can of worms. I don't know how long we'll spend on it, but that's biochar. Because that's another one that ties into a lot of Pennsylvania's industries. So for those of your viewers who aren't familiar with biochar, it's an emerging material. It's basically pure carbon, very similar chemically to charcoal, essentially. And you could do the same thing. It's organically made charcoal. So we make it through one of our processes. It's a byproduct from one of our processes. And you could, in theory, just burn it like you would with charcoal and create electricity. But actually what they found is a much more beneficial use for it as a material is, number one, is as a fertilizer additive, actually. Okay. So it's pure carbon, and what it does is it helps the soil to absorb water and control water levels, and it also helps it to absorb other nutrients. And so it actually reduces the amount of the NPK ingredients, so that's potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay. And it reduces the amount of those ingredients that you need in the fertilizer. And so it's sort of like an easy slip-in solution to increase the amount of fertilizer that we're producing, which is important because most of the fertilizer right now came from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So we're actually in a bit of a fertilizer crisis right now.
That sounds funny to say, that,
right?
But it's true. It's a real thing.
It's where we're at, exactly. Yeah. And so there is interest now growing in what are things that we can produce locally to fill that need for fertilizers, and biochar is right there, up there. Okay. And actually, one of the largest producers of biochar right now in the Northeast is based out of Cortland, New York, and they're importing all their biochar from Oregon across the entire country. And this is hard material to move too, because it's very voluminous. Yeah. It's very soft, and it takes up a lot of space. So it's not the kind of thing you want to be transporting if you can avoid it.
Right.
So we'd instantly become, one of the largest producers in the Northeast of biochar, and we could immediately slip into that demand for fertilizers. But that's not the only application. And this is actually why the new term or one of the things that you'll hear biochar called is it's a miracle material, because it has so many applications. The lists go on till tomorrow. So the first one's fertilizer. The next one actually is particularly relevant, and why it came up, especially since we're here in Pittsburgh today, is it can be used as a substitute for coke in steel making.
Really? So that is interesting.
Right?
That is interesting.
As we're in Steel City. It is a sustainable substitute for coke. So it would bring down the carbon impact of creating steel, which steel is one of our fundamental materials. We need steel. It's what we absolutely need it. And so if we can find ways to decrease the impact of producing steel, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah. And so that's the cost.
And the cost as well. Exactly. It's a locally produced product.
Right.
So that's the other one, is in steel making, substituting coke. The other one, it can be used as an additive in concrete, and it has certain benefits to the performance of concrete when you do that.
Maybe that's what the Romans used.
It might be. We were just talking about the lost Roman concrete.
Very funny because we were discussing that, and that's like, why did anybody write that down?
I don't know.
Holy
it was trade secret. Nobody wanted to let that out and let the cat out of the bag. It was you had to study for 5 years to get that recipe, and that's the only way you got it. So substitute in concrete, bring down the impact of making concrete. The last one, which, it's not even the last one. I'm sure there's more that I'm not even thinking of right now. There are really so many uses for this. But the last one I'm going to talk about today, and the one that interests me the most, is as animal bedding.
Okay.
And this is fascinating because, so right now, if you have a chicken coop, an industrial chicken coop, you have to air that chicken coop out periodically to let out all the ammonia that's building up in the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And so that loses energy every time you do that. And this is especially bad in the wintertime because you open up the barn doors, all the heat flushes out. And now you need to reheat the entire facility. And that's a big cost of energy. And so what they found is that if instead of using traditional bedding, you use biochar as the bedding for these animals, it actually absorbs the ammonia from the atmosphere. So you don't need to air out those pens as frequently. And that's going to save you a whole bunch on energy.
That's an absorptive material. Yeah, that makes,
Exactly. So it's binding with all the nitrogen.
Sure.
And what you have at the end of that is a fertilizer that's ready to go. So now you're taking your bedding and you're turning that into another revenue stream. Now you can go ahead and you can sell your bedding. At the end of your process, you can sell your bedding to the farmer who can then go and grow crops with it. This is efficiency at its best. This is the kind of stuff I love, is how do we create more efficiencies in the system? And when you can use your bedding as then another revenue stream down the day, that's beauty.
You're reusing. That's reuse to the 10th power. That's exactly what it's intended to do.
That's exactly our 4 R's, going back to them. That's our reuse element.
Absolutely.
So a lot of interest there on the biochar. Of course, I should go back to gasoline because we're a gasoline company. What we make is gasoline. That's our primary product. That's what we're focused on. It's just that biochar is a co-product from our process, and it's just so interesting. It's got so much potential.
Oh, it's fascinating. Now let me ask you this, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because here we are in my industry, in the water and wastewater industry, I'm consulting engineering, civil engineering. So one of the things that we deal with on a regular basis is, process treatment. Right. So in other words, the waste, the municipal waste stream, public waste stream. So when you flush the toilet, it goes down, it goes through the pipes, it goes to a municipally owned wastewater treatment plant. It's treated organically, biologically, chemically, and it's discharged into the system, into river streams. So that process, when it gets to the plant, it seems to me that there is a potential beneficial use there of that waste material.
There definitely could be, and there are systems that are being designed to do that right now using sewage.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's I'd say 3 main paths you can go down right now with these systems. The first one is municipal solid waste, just taking straight up trash, and that has all sorts of headaches to it that I'm not going to get into, and there's a lot of reasons why we didn't go down that path. The second one then is to do it with some kind of sewage, essentially, and there's a lot of potential there. You can use it for energy, and I think part of the process, and I haven't gone down this route so much. So I very much specialize in the woody biomass and in the agricultural biomass side of things. So I don't want to talk out of turn here. There's other companies and individuals who would specialize a lot more in the sewage variations of this design. I'm not sure what happens with all the water. That's primarily in my head right now. That's not an issue we have to deal with the type of biomass we're using with. So that's where I'm just like, I have stumbling blocks. Like, there must be some process for dealing with the water. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, most wastewater treatment plants have a dewatering piece where they create basically a sludge cake, is what what the ultimate product is.
And that sludge.
Can be, and again, that can also be used as a fertilizer.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So, but I don't want to get too far afield. I want to get back to gasoline, but I just wanted to illustrate, basically, for anybody watching this, there are so many uses for things that we throw away, that we think are just, nobody wants to think about sewage or garbage. Once it's not, once they take it away in the truck or whatever, it gets in the pipe, I'm done with it.
Out of sight, out of mind. No,
yeah.
exactly. And that's the kind of stuff I wanted to actually specialize in, because that's the crucial part of creating a circular economy. Right now, that's the linear model. You buy something, you use it, you throw it out. It's linear. Nothing's happening with that trash.
Right.
And so it's just a pure linear system. The circular system is taking what's coming out at the back end, the trash, and trying to recycle that back to the start of the process, turn it into a product that can be sold. And so that's really where I decided I want to focus on, is let's take all these products that you're saying, we don't think about, that we see as a waste, and let's turn those into valuable products that we can actually use. And I mean, they did this in Norway a while ago as far as electricity is concerned. They built electricity generation plants that ran on trash, municipal solid waste. And they got to a point where they had a trash shortage. They were buying trash from neighboring countries to feed their power plants. I mean, how outrageous is that? They were buying trash.
Ridiculous. It sounds so ridiculous, but and it's like when you get focused into something new, something that works. Once it works, that's human nature, right? We want to pile everything into that.
That's right. And that's where I think maybe, the biggest risk with these systems is that we overshoot the capacity, and then we get to a point where actually we're running out of trash and we're running out of sewage. I mean, it's an outrageous thing to think about, that we'd actually get to a point where we don't have enough of the garbage, but it could happen if we get good enough at recycling those materials. And I hope that we're moving towards that, because we're not alone, Woodland Bio. There's other companies who are working in the same space of trying to turn waste products into fuel. And so I'm hoping that we're just on the verge of a bit of an explosion in this field, where trash is going to become very valuable all of a sudden. Maybe we'll get paid for them to pick up our trash one day.
There you go.
Knows?
There you go. Now, is there a chemical a piece of this, or are there chemicals added to this process to make this happen? So back to the woody biomass to gasoline. Okay. Can you walk us through a little bit of that process? How does that process work?
Yeah, I can't get, so I don't want to get into too much detail, just because part of it is proprietary. That's part of our secret sauce. But what I can explain is basically we're trying to make a hydrocarbon. And so hydrocarbons are made up of hydrogen and carbon, as the name implies. So those are our only two ingredients that we need. There's nothing being added to it. We just need a source of carbon and hydrogen. Now, woody biomass does have more carbon than hydrogen in it. It doesn't have the right ratio. So half of the game of designing these systems is balancing hydrogen and carbon to get the right ratio that you want for producing your final product. In the case of gasoline, it's 2 to 1, more or less 2 hydrogen to 1 carbon. The problem is that wood has more or less the opposite. 2 carbon to 1 hydrogen. So there's quite a bit of hydrogen deficiency in the system. So the only thing that's being added into the process is water to get the hydrogen from it. And also the oxygen. The oxygen we actually use to feed the system because we need complete combustion. We need clean oxygen for combustion as much as possible in our process. So the water is basically the only thing that's being added in the process. So we're splitting into its hydrogen and oxygen components, and we're using those two in our process. It's wood and it's water, and that's it. And that's what we're using as our primary ingredients. Now, there are chemicals that go into the conversion because it's a catalytic conversion. But those chemicals are not being used up by the process. So they're not showing up in the actual gasoline that you're buying. It's just being used as a conversion vehicle, basically, to convert our carbon and hydrogen into our hydrocarbon. So that's really the name of the game. We need hydrogen, we need carbon, and let's go and find it.
It's that simple.
It really is. I mean, it's the source of most of our energy are these hydrocarbons. So we're just getting to a point where we are understanding fully how to synthesize them. And actually, no, I wouldn't say we're just getting to the point. I mean, the technology behind this dates way back. I mean, World War II, they started developing the first systems. The first iterations of the technology we're using were developed during World War II.
Really?
And this was by the Germans in particular, because they didn't have any fossil fuel sources. And so they had to figure out, how do we use what we have? And they were trying to figure out, how do we use agricultural byproducts? One of the
stimuluses of them invading the neighboring countries is because they didn't have
any of those resources.
They had no resources at all.
Exactly. So they had to get resourceful about how do we turn some of our byproducts or our waste streams into our fuel sources. So they developed the first, and very inefficient compared to what we're using nowadays, but it was a first step. And for the Germans, it wasn't they didn't have to, I mean, part of what we did here is we figured out all the economics of this. How do you make a business that's actually profitable? And it is profitable. I mean, this is the energy business. There's money to be made here. It's an essential item. So we're still first and foremost a business that's going to make money, despite all that. We love being about the mission. We are about the mission. I am about the mission. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to make a profit on it.
Absolutely.
That's what we're here to do.
That's what it's all about.
Exactly. So we do make a good profit. The Germans, they might have been breaking even with their system because it was so far back in the day, but we've made a lot of improvements since then, basically, to the system, to the point now that we've become okay at synthesizing fuels. I'm sure there's still improvements to be made, and I'm looking forward to that future. for the industry, but this is where we start with what we already have, with what works, and that's when we create a financially sustainable model, and then we use the money, the profits that we make from all of that, to invest in the next generation of technology, to improve it and to get to that next generation. To give you an idea of what that might look like, there are basically what's being developed right now is, as I said, we need carbon and we need hydrogen. We're getting our carbon from wood. This processes that are being in development right now for the next generation, and I'm talking 20, 30 years down the road, so don't go looking for this to come out tomorrow. But the next generation that we're working on is getting the carbon from the air, so that we don't need to use, because right now wood is basically an intermediary that we're using to use technology that we already have, because the wood trees already have the technology to absorb carbon from the atmosphere for us. Thank you, trees. You're wonderful, and we love you for what you do. So we're using them as an intermediary to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and turn that into our fuel. Eventually, we want to try and cut that middleman out and get to a point where we can just go straight from the air, take that carbon,
just pull the carbon right out,
and turn that into fuel. And
that's amazing.
There's systems being designed, but again, so early in development. But that's where, again, I want to be that guy who takes those systems that the brilliant, smart engineers are working on, and I want to figure out how do we turn that into a financially viable business, something that we can make profit off of, that people are going to be interested in investing in.
And one of the things that the engineering industry needs is more leaders like you, like you're saying, right? Because, looking at this from a purely technical engineering geek perspective, it's really, really cool, right? But very few engineers, and it's nothing against engineers, but very few engineers would be able to get into the detail that you'd have for the last 35 minutes or so, right? So that's the marketing piece of it.
That's exactly
Technology innovation is no good if it doesn't get to the people.
That's exactly right. Taking their really smart, complex ideas and boiling those down in terms that, investors can understand, that audiences can understand. And that's always been like what I sort of specialized in, was how do we take these fairly complex messages, and this is the prime business I'm working on, but before this I was a marketing consultant. And so that's what a lot of what I did for other businesses was, how do I take your mission and what you're trying to do and boil down to a simple, easy to digest message that people are going to identify with.
Sure.
And so, just taking that and applying it to my own idea basically was what we were doing here.
Right.
But in essence, what you're saying is take all the great stuff, because engineers they're brilliant and they're great in the lab and inventing things, but as you said, the presenting skills are usually a little bit lacking.
No, and that's very true, because it's not something in their defense that's taught in any engineering curriculum.
Absolutely.
Right? They don't talk about the relationship building and interpersonal skills in business. You know what I mean? So, and that's the most important part of any job, of any business, is the interpersonal relationships and communication. And it's because engineering is such a highly technical field. It's really difficult to become an engineer, and to be a practicing engineer is even more difficult. But to have that piece, which is why they need guys like us, right? So I'm not going to complain too loud, because
we'd be out of
would
jobs.
Talk us out of work. But that's essentially what the kind of the intermediary piece between the industry and the public. And it doesn't matter if it's, taking woody biomass, turning it into gasoline, turning waste sewage into potable water, which is possible, right? But when you say that to somebody, they're like, they're gagging, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
But the reality of it is, they can take the treated sewage. There's processes that the discharge and back through a filtration system, and it's cleaner than the source water started with.
No, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? But you got to get past that gag factor. So it's the same thing.
It is, and that is a marketing factor. I mean, it's to one degree with the sewage water. What they did is they just put it into tap water, and they didn't tell anyone. And it's like, so then you don't even know, and you're drinking it anyway, and you're fine. Look at that. So that's one way of approaching it. But it is that education factor of like, we can make a safe product at the end of this, and that's, on the water side, that's the other crucial resource. I mean, for me, it's water, it's energy, and then there's food, and those are the three crucial things that we need for our.
And are you using recycled water
for our process? I mean, that's in the works right now. We're understanding our property and the potential for water on the property, and then how much recycling we're going to do of our own. I mean, yes, we want to recycle our own processed water as much as possible. But yeah, there might be an element of drawing some from our local reservoirs. But water is not a huge component. We're not using absurd amounts of water compared to what some other industries are using. So it's comparable to what a farm might use. It's really not a huge part of the equation. We're really the woods is the difficult part. I'll tell you that. I mean, that figuring out, because with these systems, one of the things that we need to understand is that they can't shut down. You don't turn this on and off whenever you have wood and call it a day. No, it takes a lot of energy and it's a very expensive process to gear these up and gear them down. So once they're up and running, you keep them running.
Keep it running, absolutely.
And that's where number one priority is keeping a constant stream of wood coming into the facility and making sure that you can feed it continuously. And anyone who works in these type of projects will tell you the same thing. I mean, the first thing they ask about is what's your supply? Where's it coming from?
Sure, that's important.
It is, exactly, because we can't shut down. And so that's honestly been the tougher part, because it is a lot of material, and the location we're looking at doesn't have rail access. And in general, rail doesn't work so well with logging, because the location that the material is coming from changes continuously. Train works when you have a fixed point A and a fixed point B. It's great. But when point A is changing continuously, trains don't work. And so that's where we're relying on trucking to bring the material in. And so that's actually been perhaps the most difficult part, is understanding this is a lot of truck traffic that needs to come in, making sure we can do it safely. Has been honestly one of the top priorities. Water is still important, but not as crucial as that question of how do we get the material.
The transportation piece is very important, because there's a lot of safety issues involved with that. When you're putting additional truck traffic into the motoring public, right? That they've been used to traffic patterns, and the traffic patterns include the types of vehicles that they're interacting with as they're driving. We went through this with the gas industry down here. All of a sudden, even more impactful than the drilling, was the hundreds and hundreds of water trucks that all of a sudden are on the roads, and you're not used to that, and it changes perception of everything. But and when I talked about water and things like that, that's just some of the things that when I was in the early stages of the natural gas industry in the Marcellus Shale, which again, you're talking about a outrageously plentiful natural resource that we are blessed with here in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
Right? We're sitting right now on top of one of the largest natural gas fields in the entire world. Right? We don't have one of the largest forests, but we are 75%. I think the last estimate I heard, Pennsylvania is 75% forest and farmland. So we definitely have the raw materials and the resources.
You do, absolutely. And actually, the footprint overlaps very neatly. The footprint of the Marcellus Shale and the footprint of the Pennsylvania forest, it's pretty much mapped over each other exactly the same. So it's about the same coverage, and it's the same resources. But where you can't go drilling on state lands for natural gas, we can extract material from state lands for our process. So that's one advantage that we have a little bit. But no, it's absolutely, Pennsylvania has so much raw resources, and that's again something I encourage everyone to look at. Both the Hardwood Development Council, AHUG, and Pennsylvania Forest Products Association. The Hardwood Development Council in particular has some really, really good data on how much material is growing in Pennsylvania's forests right now. I mean, it's the amount we have, double the amount of material is growing as material that's dying and being extracted from the forest. So it's growing at a very rapid rate. We're constantly gaining material here in Pennsylvania, and it's again more than we could dream to consume, honestly, even with 50 facilities. So there's just so much potential here in terms of energy to feed even neighboring states, honestly. That's one of the strongest things that Pennsylvania has going for it. It's very much an energy state. It's an agriculture state. So you're feeding the rest of the nation.
And we're located in we have easy access, particularly via trucks, to at least half of the American population.
That's exactly.
We can get anywhere from here.
Major cities as well as rural areas. It's very well located. So Pennsylvania has definitely got a lot of potential for the first state to sort of implement this in. And again, it could take. I can't even fathom how many facilities we'll have here in Pennsylvania. Eventually, I hope we will be expanding also to other states and other countries where there's more materials, because you'll get to a point where there's not as much demand for we've hit what the demand is for gasoline in Pennsylvania. And it's rather than producing the gasoline here in Pennsylvania and shipping it to the other places, again, going back to circular economy as much as possible, I'd rather put another facility over there to feed that market, because again, it always goes back to circular economy. We're trying to create our products and keep it within a localized area, because it's better for the economy and for all the people and the community and everyone living in it, as well as being better for the environment. To me, that was kind of what I got into business for. Is I think there was a little bit of a dichotomy happening where people were putting business versus the environment, and I fundamentally didn't believe in that dichotomy. I think that you can have business and the environment.
I agree.
That they can coexist, and in fact they should, because efficiency is good for business. Efficiency is good for the environment. You know, so if you're running a smart, efficient, circular business, it's good for the environment, it's good
Absolutely.
for the community, it's good for the economy. It should be a win-win-win.
Absolutely. And everything that we've talked about here today is everybody wins.
Right.
Everybody that touches this, even from the manufacturer, from the producer to the end user, everybody wins.
Exactly. It should be a full benefit the whole way down the cycle. And as you said, for the producer as much, because they're very much in a struggle right now. So that's exactly, sort of the benefit we were hoping to bring, and that we hope we can replicate across the state eventually.
This has been fascinating, and we can sit and talk about this all day, and we're getting toward the end here. But so I like to let our guests, give us a parting thought, and you've shared a lot of information today. I mean, this has been fascinating. I actually can't wait to watch this because, again, this is kind of like my sweet spot. I love this stuff. But so, what parting thought would you like to leave with the folks viewing this, and including the Oracle of Wellsboro? Because he's going to watch this and critique it. It's going to be, we're going to hear about the show. So
I know. I'm almost worried, but
parting thought, because once you hit the market with this, there's going to be a lot of questions. There's, you're going to hit that, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And they'll start to look at, the public will start to look at ways to kind of chip away at you, So what's your parting thought? And actually just in general.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, it always comes back to sustainability. And I think that, as you're saying, if people are going to start chipping away at this, they're going to want to chip away at the sustainability. That you're not truly in this for the sustainable side of things. And how they do that is saying you're using trees. You're cutting down trees, and trees are, great, and we shouldn't be using them for anything. We should leave them as
our most sustainable resource.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what I come back and say, is that wood really is our most sustainable resource. I mean, it's renewable. We've been building with it for as far back as humankind can fathom. I mean, it's one of the first materials we ever used.
And you're using the waste product.
And that's
for all intents and purposes.
That's exactly right. It's stuff that you wouldn't even traditionally use. So that's where, I just say, like, we're truly in it for the sustainability. I spend a lot of time understanding the sustainability of what we're trying to do from a forestry perspective, and making sure that what we're doing is truly beneficial for the environment and for the forest in particular. And so, I just say that we're in it honestly for the environment. We want to do something that's right for the environment. We want to do something right that's good for the community and the economy at the same time. And I'm hoping that sort of everyone can get together behind that mission. It's energy driven, it's community driven, it's environment driven. Hopefully this is something that's going to bring people from all sorts of backgrounds together and agree, yes, this is the kind of innovations we want to make.
I think it will. And when you really boil it down, distill it to its very basic core, right? So we're talking about alternative fuels. That's one of the hot topics around the country, in government, in business, and in industry. So we know that we've got gasoline vehicles, we have diesel vehicles, now we have electric vehicles, right? We have CNG vehicles, LNG vehicles. But think about this. This product, this gasoline, makes the life cycle of all of these other forms of fuels and energy that much longer. It buys us that much more time, right? So introducing this fuel, this natural resource, turning into gasoline, it gives us more opportunity for electric vehicles, more opportunity to develop our natural gas resources and things like that. So it's a benefit, and again, it's part of an overarching energy portfolio.
That's exactly right. And that's the other thing I should probably mention just before we tune out, is that the same process that we're developing here for gasoline, eventually future iterations too, we should be working into diesel and aviation fuels too. That's eventually where we want to work into as well. So we're gasoline to start with, just because that's where we're at technologically, but then there's all these other potentials. Same as there is on the supply side, there's potential on what you're producing side too. So lots of future potential. And just what I would say is, let's diversify our investments in sustainability. Let's not try and focus so intently on one solution that's going to be the only solution. Let's try and try many things out. Let's try everything out all at the same time.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution out there.
Exactly. Absolutely. Let's just try everything and see what sticks and where it sticks, because it's going to depend on what each region is going to have their own solution. So let's not try and make one thing fit everybody.
I love it. I love it. Well, listen, thank you so much. This exceeded my expectations. I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Oh, it was a real pleasure, Jamie. Thanks again for having me. I'm hoping maybe we'll do this again sometime.
We will.
It was an absolute pleasure.
And honestly, I'm looking forward to working together. I think there's a lot of synergy and a lot of opportunity for us to do some really good things together. And I'm looking forward to supporting your initiative here with Woody Biomass.
I absolutely appreciate Woody Biomass Innovations, woodybio.com. If anybody wants wants to come and visit us. Yeah, we appreciate all the support we can get at this stage. It's early days, so we need all hands on deck.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, young man. I appreciate
Thank you, Jamie. Have a great day.